Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and the World Championships is coming up very soon later this next week, and I wanted to make sure that I got a World Championship tier list out looking at potentially what the best decks are for the World Championships, my opinion on the meta going into Worlds, and kind of breaking down each deck, where it stands in the format, and whether or not the deck will be a good play for Worlds, and how it could succeed in Worlds. So I'm definitely excited for this. The meta is actually pretty interesting right now, with quite a few new decks, especially post-NEIC. We are seeing some new decks pop up at League Cups and League Challenges, which is starting to raise some attention over on Twitter, and I'm excited to take a look at it. If y'all are new to the second channel, make sure to click that subscribe button down below, leave a like in the video, and I will leave a link to this tier list down below in the description if you want to go do it yourself. Let me know what you think of my tier list and all my opinions and thoughts down below. I would be interested here because I'm sure some people will agree to disagree. So, starting things off here, we have Palkia V-Star. So, Palkia V-Star is a very cool deck that's doing some pretty cool things in the format. Now, Palkia right now is using Xianpao without Baxcalibur. So it is, at the end of the day, a Palkia V-Star deck, but it is playing that Xianpao in the deck for the ability to get 2 water energy out of the deck, kind of like playing Capacious Bucket. The deck also plays a ton of switching cards, and that is the whole goal and purpose of the Palkia V-Star deck. It's actually doing decent in online tourneys. I've seen it do well in League Cups. There's actually a few players in my area that do play this deck to League Cups, and they've done pretty well. So, honestly, this might be more of a Tier 3 deck. I don't think that Palkia is a deck that you really have to respect. It's certainly not a bad deck by any means. I think it has decent matchups across the board. It does have the ability to abuse Radiant, Greninja, Cross-Switcher, Cologne, which is very, very good against, obviously, Gardevoir and Lost Box specifically. And that's kind of the big selling point of the deck is Palkia can be a very big attacker. Star Portal's good. Greninja plus Cologne is a very good combo this deck does get access to. You can also play other cool cards like Starmie V is something I've seen used in these Palkia decks, is that Starmie V, which is pretty good against Arceus and Gardevoir. So I definitely think that Palkia is a pretty solid deck right now. I'm going to put it in Tier 3. I don't think the deck is like amazing enough to maybe put higher, like maybe it's Tier 2, but I don't think Palkia belongs in Tier 2. I definitely think that it is a Tier 3 deck at the moment, but it is still a really cool deck that I think probably will have a good placement. I could see a Palkia V-Star deck getting like top 32 at Worlds. Next, we got to talk about the Arc Pile deck. So starting things off is Arcdura Umbreon. Now, unfortunately, I think this deck has fallen off a little bit, and that's mainly because of the rise of Lost Tina. I think Arcdura is no longer as good as it was after NEIC, because obviously Arcdura going into NEIC was very good. It almost won NEIC. It has a really good matchup against Lugia, Lost Box, and Gardevoir. Those are the 3 big decks the deck likes to play against. But the deck does have awkward matchups against other decks. I think that its big loss will be to Xianpao and potentially Lost Tina. Lost Tina specifically destroys Arcdura, in my opinion. I think the deck has fallen off quite a bit. I would probably put it in like Tier 1 or S tier post-NEIC, but I think the deck has fallen to maybe Tier 1.5. I think the deck is still solid, and I mean, Gardevoir, Lost Box, and Lugia are not going anywhere anytime soon. There's quite a few different ways to play Lugia right now. There's the colorless build, there's the single strike build without the Urshifu, so there are still like good matchups this deck. I can't reasonably put this deck below Tier 1.5. I don't think the deck is as good as it used to be, and that's just because of Lost Tina. Lost Tina, a lot of people think is like the BDIF. It is surging in popularity, not only in the IRL scene, but also at League, also in online tourneys. I mean, literally in the last video where we looked at the recent results from the late night, we saw 4 Lost Tina decks in top 4. Half of the top 8, sorry, was Lost Tina. Not top 4. Half of the top 8 was Lost Tina. Lost Tina really does hurt this deck. The deck is still good. Umbreon is still a good attacker. It still has a decent time into something like Mew. Duraludon is still just really good in my opinion, but the deck does have that awkward matchup, and I also think that it loses to Arctina, so I'm pretty sure this deck kind of falls to Tier 1.5. I don't want to put in Tier 2, because the deck is still like winning League Cups and challenges, and the deck still has potential against most of the big decks. It's just how that Giratina popularity right now, it just really hurts it. Arctur Vulpix, I'll probably put in Rogue bad. I mean, it's just a worse Arcdura Umbreon at this point. The Vulpix is cute. It actually isn't bad against Xianpao and Gardevoir. Gardevoir doesn't really care about Vulpix anymore. The problem with the Vulpix Dura is it's just a worse Arc Dura Umbreon against something like Giratina, where you probably want to instead have the Umbreon VMAX over the Vulpix. I don't think that Arc Dura Vulpix is that good right now. I'm going to put it in the Rogue bad category. I don't think the deck is as good as it was before, and maybe for NEIC this would have been an okay deck to play, but post NEIC with the way the format is right now, I don't think Arc Dura Vulpix is a very good deck, and I don't think it's going to do anything at NEIC. I think Arc Dura Umbreon is the better Duraludon deck to play right now. Next up is Arc Pikachu. So this is kind of just a general Arc Pika deck. There is like the Arc Slacking Umbreon deck that does play the Pikachu, but there's other Arc decks that play Pikachu. A big one right now is Arc Pikachu Umbreon with Lucario or Aerodactyl V-Star are two of the big ones that I'm thinking of. So I think that Arc Pika is probably tier 2. Pikachu's pretty solid right now against some of the decks. It's good against Lugia, good against Xianpao, good against Lost Box, good against United Wings, if that counts, good against Tinglu. The problem with Flying Pikachu is that it doesn't really fix that many other matchups. Like, it's not like it's... Well, I guess it does fix Rapid Strike a little bit, because then you have a really good attacker against the Inteleon VMAX, but it doesn't really fix that many matchups. It's not... Like, the Pikachu isn't very good in the Arc Mirror. It's not very good against Mew. It's not very good against Lost Tina. Not good against... it's not even that good against Lugia if they play the Urshifu. So, the Flying Pikachu, I think this deck is a tier 2 deck at best. I think these Arc Pika piles are pretty good. Playing like a 1-1 Pikachu and like Arc Dura is okay, but I would say like if you're playing Pikachu as one of the main attackers in the deck, it's probably, I would say tier 2. If you're playing like Arc Pika Umbreon, Lucario would be more of a tier 2 deck. But there are other Arc decks that do play the Pikachu, but I would still say that like these main Arc Pika decks probably just tier 2. Arc Drago, probably a tier 3 deck. I like this deck, and it's cool that it did win NEIC in the Juniors Division. But I don't think the deck is, like, super, like, solid right now. It isn't a bad deck by any means. I actually think that Arc Drago is kind of an underrated deck. That's why I can't put it in the Rogue bad category. I think that it does have still a bit of legs right now going into Worlds. It's still, like, a decent deck for Worlds, in my opinion. It's not the worst Arc deck you can play, is what I'm trying to say. It's not... If you're going to play an Arc pile to Worlds, I do not think that Regidrago Arceus is the worst deck you could bring to Worlds, because it does do decent things. It's basically like a... I wouldn't call it Arctina 2.0, but it's very, like, similar to Arctina, right? Because you have the Giratina, the Judge Path. The thing is, you have extra attackers like Goodra, Noivern. You have the Kirlia Gallade engine if you're playing that, or you're playing Bibarel, whatever the case is. I don't think the deck is terrible. I think it's kind of an underrated deck right now, and I think it's probably a tier 3 deck at best. Next up is Arc Goodra. So, I'm going to put this in the Rogue bad category. I don't think Arc Goodra is that great right now. I don't think it's a terrible deck by any means. I think it has some cool plays it can make if you're playing, you know, Panic Mask. You have Path in the deck. The downside is you're not getting access to Moisture Star a lot of the time. You have to play Starbirth, but it's not the worst Arc Pile deck you can play, but I don't think that Arc Goo is that great right now. I don't even think it really has a good Giratina matchup, which is kind of the thing right now. If your deck can't be Giratina, why bother playing it, right? And I don't think that Arc Goo really has the greatest time into something like Arctina or Lost Tina. Well, I think it beats Arctina, but Lost Tina is probably tough. So I don't think that Goodra is the greatest, like, Arc Goo is the greatest deck right now. It depends, I guess, what you play it with. Like, if you're playing another attacker in the deck, like Alolan Vulpix, or Flying Pikachu, or Umbreon, or Duraludon. I don't even know. Whatever other attacker you would put in your Arc Goo deck. Yeah. Next up is the Michael Catron Arc Slacking Umbreon deck. Now, this deck does play a Flying Pikachu, but it's not really a Flying Pikachu deck. But this deck is really cool, and I kind of think it's up there with Arc Dura right now as one of the better Arc piles you can play. I think that the Arc Slacking Umbreon deck is a pretty solid deck. The Michael Catron deck from NEIC seems pretty good, and I definitely think that it still has legs going into Worlds. Slacking's a really cool card. This deck, again, might have a harder time into Lost Tina, but even then, I think the Lost Tina matchup is a lot better because you do have VMAXs, but your main attackers aren't all VMAXs. You can attack with Slacking against Lost Tina and Arc Tina. The Slacking's pretty good in most Arc Mirror matches. The deck has a lot of legs and maybe even some room for improvement. I mean, the Medicham is still in there if you want to cut it, maybe try out different attackers in the deck. I think the Arc Slacking deck still has room for improvement for Worlds, and I think it's still a solid deck for Worlds. It's one of the better Arc piles for the World Championships, in my opinion. I'm going to put that up in tier 1.5. The next up is Arctina. I think Arctina genuinely is maybe a tier 1 deck right now because This is the only Arceus deck that I think reasonably has a fine matchup against most of the top decks. Specifically, it has a decent time against Lost Tina, which is the big deck right now that you probably want to be beating is Lost Tina as an Arc deck. And this is what scares Arceus off. Every single Arc deck we looked at, apart from Arc Tina, struggles against Lost Tina. I guess Regidrago can beat Lost Tina, but Arc Tina, in my opinion, is just a safer deck for the Lost Tina matchup. And it also is just fine, right? You have Judge Path, you have Ionopath. You can even play a Flying Pikachu in your Arc Tina deck, which I personally like. It helps against like stuff like Xianpao and can help against Lugia too, which is also pretty solid right now. So I think Arc Tina is one of the better Arc decks, and in fact, I think it is the best Arceus deck right now. I'm going to put it in Tier 1. This might be a bit of a hot take, but I think Arc Tina is reasonably a Tier 1 deck. It's also like, it's the best performing Arceus deck in the online tourney scene too, and a lot of people are doing pretty well at League Cups with Arc Tina. But yeah, I think Arc Tina at the moment is the best Arceus deck. I also think it's the one Arc deck that beats the other Arc decks, because it has heavier outs to path. The Giratina is really good at one-hit KOing stuff against other Arc decks. So I think that this is the best Arc deck right now. I think it has the most reasonable Lost Tina matchup and also has a pretty good matchup into the other Arceus decks, right? So I'm going to put this deck maybe in Tier 1 for now. I think Arc Tina is a reasonable Tier 1 deck. In my opinion, it's the best way to play Arceus heading in to the World Championships. Next up is Xianpao. You could put that in Tier 1 too for now. I think Xianpao is a pretty, maybe Tier 1.5. No, I think it's reasonable as a Tier 1 deck. I think the best way to play the Xianpao deck right now is with the Arceus V-Star tech, where you can use Starbirth to get you cross-switch your Cologne plays with your Radiant Greninja. And the Arceus can be a nice backup attacker to have too. It's not bad too against like Flying Pikachu if you run into that. I definitely think that Xianpao is a solid deck right now for Worlds. I think it's kind of reasonable in the format. It just kind of is Xianpao. It's decent. Doesn't really have like a super bad matchup against like anything in my opinion. Like maybe like Gardevoir is maybe your trickiest matchup depending on whether or not you can pull off those, you know, cross switcher plays. But I definitely think that Xianpao is a pretty solid deck right now in the format. And I definitely don't hate it going into the World Championships. I think it's solid enough that it's probably a Tier 1 deck right now in the format. Not the best deck in the format by any means, but still probably just a Tier 1 deck. And definitely still a solid play for Worlds. And I think the Arceus version of it is the way to play over the Palkia build. Next up is Darkrai, probably just like rogue bad. I mean, Darkrai is kind of just hit or miss right now. Yeah, Gardevoir and Mew are still out there, but I don't think those decks are really worth playing a Darkrai V-Star deck for. Gardevoir is still popular and very good, but I don't think that Darkrai is really that great right now in the format. I also think that, again, that Lost Tina matchup and even Lugia are just too tricky, so I probably wouldn't bother playing Darkrai. It's cool that it's like had a resurgence in popularity and was able to be put on a tier list after its like decent run in the Scarlet Violet format, but I think Darkrai's kind of just fallen off a little bit with the way the meta is looking now after NEIC. Same with Dialga Magnezone. It's a cool meme deck, but again, it's more of a rogue bad deck. Its main trait is that it maybe has a decent time against Xianpao, and that's probably about it. I mean, if the deck sets up, it's pretty good, but I don't think that Dialga is any more than just probably a rogue/bad deck, unfortunately. Next up is Double Turbo Mew. Double Turbo Mew we can probably safely put in Tier 3. The problem with Double Turbo Mew is that it is a very strong deck if your opponent does not play Spiritomb. If the opponent plays a Spiritomb, then Double Turbo Mew is pretty bad. And a lot of the decks right now are playing Spiritomb. Giratina Lost One is playing Tomb. Arc decks are playing Tomb. Gardevoir, sometimes they play Tomb. Yeah, I think that Double Turbo Mew is a risky deck. I personally wouldn't play it. It's good if you don't play against Spiritomb. Like, the deck's pretty solid if you are not playing against a deck that has Spiritomb in it. That's kind of my take I have with DT Mew, right? It's very good, but Spiritomb really hinders the deck because you don't have Fusion Energy or Meloetta or Ice Cube to help counteract the Spiritomb. You just have the Double Turbo Mew engine, which is just not good enough to beat Spiritomb a lot of the time. So that's the downside of playing Double Turbo Mew. I just don't think it's very good. If somehow you dodge Spiritomb all day, the deck is kind of cool, but other than that, I think you're going to have to hit a couple Spiritomb throughout your run at Worlds, and that's probably going to hold Double Turbo Mew back all around. Next up is Guardy deck. So we have Guardy Mewtwo. I think at this point, it's kind of in the rogue bad category. Guardy Mewtwo just hasn't been able to make any waves outside of some decent online tourney placements in the last format, but in the Paldea format, we haven't seen Guardy Mewtwo do well. Even with Reverse Energy and Iono, the deck just hasn't been able to do anything in the format. I think the deck is still kind of cool, and maybe is an underexplored deck in general, but I think going into Worlds, I think Guardy Mewtwo is probably in the rogue bad category. Yeah, it does do better in Japan, but I don't think that's going to translate at Worlds, in my opinion. So I would call this deck a rogue bad deck going into Worlds, and this maybe is the deck that has the highest chance of making a random run at Worlds and doing pretty well. But going into Worlds, I don't think it's very good. I think that Normal Guardy's probably better. The Mewtwo doesn't really do anything right now. I mean, I guess it's okay against, like, Lost Zone, but, like, again, Lost Tina can beat Mewtwo. They have Star Requiem and Path of Peak, which is enough to get through the Mewtwo. Plus, they can just one-shot your Mewtwo anyways. So, I think Guardy Mewtwo just gets a bad matchup against Lost Tina right now, and I think that's ultimately going to throw it off from being any good in the format. So I would probably just put Guardy Mewtwo in the Rogue Bad category. I don't think it's very well positioned in the meta. Next up is normal Guardy. I mean, yeah, I'm going to put Guardy in S tier. I think we should still consider Gardevoir to be an S tier deck. I think that people are really undermining Guardy right now. I think Guardy is, without a doubt, still one of the best decks in the format. It's still, like, the deck you probably want to be beating the most right now if you're building a deck, because it's just Gardevoir, right? It's a very straightforward deck. It's very strong. I think it's going to see a lot of play at Worlds. I don't know if it'll be like NEIC, where it took up, like, 25% of the meta, but I wouldn't call Gardevoir any more than just an S-tier deck right now, because it definitely is an S-tier deck. It is maybe not the best deck in the format, but it definitely deserves to be in that conversation of one of the best decks. Whether or not it is the best of the best, it definitely is one of the best decks right now. And yeah, Gardevoir's still just an insane deck, right? It also doesn't really have, like, any terrible matchups right now in the format. And with Arcdura Umbreon declining a little bit because of the rise of Giratina, that actually places Gardevoir a little bit higher, because now the Umbreon is not as popular as it's going to be, right? And I mean, obviously other dark decks do exist, but I think Gardevoir is still a very solid deck, and I think, without a doubt, it's still an S-tier deck for Worlds. I mean, a lot of people may disagree with that for whatever reason, but I really do not think Gardevoir is going anywhere going into Worlds. It is, in my opinion, still one of the best decks in the format, maybe even the best deck in the format, because it still just can beat a lot of stuff, and with the decline, again, of Umbreon, this could be good. Next up, we have the Gengar VMAX deck. I'm going to put that in tier 3. We haven't seen this deck have, like, obviously insane performances since, but I still think the deck is kind of a cute little deck that can still run hot. I mean, I think the Gengar deck, under the right circumstances, has a great time into Arceus decks. Judge Path is just good against most other decks. It can probably beat Gardevoir. Obviously, your big matchups that you're going to struggle against are probably the Lost Zone decks. Maybe Tina is beatable, because you can still, like, hand disrupt, one-hit KO them, and hopefully that's enough to beat them. But I think, like, the Lost Box matchup is going to be the one that you're going to struggle with the most. But I still think the Gengar deck is kind of cute. It kind of reminds me of, like, it's kind of like Palkia right now, right? It's that one of random deck that can have a hot run in the tourney. It's basically just like Palkia, in my opinion. The way I look at it, it's like Palkia. It's honestly like, maybe, I don't know if I would call it a worse Arctina, but it does seem like maybe a better Arctina in some regards, because it's a little bit more straightforward. You have a good typing. It's just you have a bad Lost Zone matchup. That's the downside. But I do think that Gengar can maybe take down Lost Tina under the right circumstances, but I think your Lost Box matchup is going to be very difficult. But I do think that Gengar is a cute deck right now that, who knows, maybe somebody could play to Worlds and get, like, a cool run with it. I wouldn't put in the Rogue Bad category just yet, is basically what I'm trying to say. Maybe after Worlds we can call it that. But for now, you know, let's put in the tier 3 and see where that takes it. Next up is Rapid Strike. So Rapid Strike did win NEIC, which is a big deal, right? It won NEIC. It's a very strong deck right now in the format. After NEIC, does it do very well, though, is going to be the question. So Rapid Strike beats Lost Box. It's fine into Gardevoir. Its Arceus matchups aren't terrible either. But the question is, where does it go from here after Worlds, right? It's not like people are going to tech for Rapid Strike. So I'm very iffy on where I want to place Rapid Strike. It does seem like a good deck. It kind of reminds me of something like a deck that just kind of beats the decks you want to hit. Because other than that, I think it's going to have a bad time into Lugia. I even think the Lost Tina matchup is going to be 50-50, because if they can set up, Tina just runs over the Urshifu and the Inteleon pretty easily, because Tina's very hard to deal with. Like, normal Lost Box, you know, is easier for Inteleon, but I really think that Lost Tina is going to be a difficult matchup for the Urshifu Inteleon deck. So I'm not sure where to place Inteleon. Maybe tier 1.5. I think the deck is still pretty good. It's still having its runs, but I don't know, man. It's weird because going into NEIC, nobody would have put it any higher than maybe like tier 2 or tier 3. But after NEIC, after it won, it's like, oh, maybe this deck's actually good. But it's one of those decks you just have to have the good run to make it good. I probably can put it in tier 2 for now. I think that a good player can do well with it. And obviously, Cyrus is a very good player, and Cyrus did very well with it at NEIC. But I don't think it's a deck that can be replicated twice, potentially, for Worlds. And again, with that iffy Lost Tina matchup, I don't know if I can place it any higher than tier 2 for now. Also, with Lugia being in the format, it's tough to say. I don't know, man. Inteleon's a weird deck. This is probably the hardest deck to, you know, kind of rank on this tier list as to where to put it. For now, I'm going to put it in tier 2. It could change, and it's one of those decks that, again, a good player can have a really hot run with it and potentially get, like, top 8 at Worlds or top 16 at Worlds, but man, I don't know. I don't know if I can put Inteleon higher than tier 2. It's tough to say right now where its placement is. Next up is Colorless Lugia, probably tier 3. Colorless Lugia, unfortunately, is just kind of not mid, but very underwhelming right now in the meta. I think that it maybe gets a little bit better with the fall of Duraludon, and it actually probably has a pretty solid time into Lost Tina, but I don't think that Colorless Lugia is the greatest deck right now. It's definitely not a bad deck. It reminds me again of like Palkia Gengar. It's one of those decks that just seems all right enough to play, and then I can't call it a bad deck. I don't think Colorless Lugia is a bad deck. I think that it's solid, and there are some cool improvements that can be made. I mean, we did see a Lugia slacking Snorlax deck, which is Colorless Lugia, effectively win a late night, so there is still potential for the deck in the format. I think maybe people just have to figure it out. And again, with Duraludon falling off potentially, maybe Colorless Lugia is on the rise. So I don't know, man. I wouldn't call it that bad of a deck. And I think that maybe it gets an okay matchup into Lost Tina. Maybe that puts it into tier 2. But heading into Worlds, probably tier 3. Post-Worlds, if it does well, maybe it can be higher than tier 3. Next up is Single Strike Lugia. I think Lugia is still a tier 1 deck right now. Depending on the popularity of Temple of Sinnoh, and that's maybe what's going to hold it back. But I still think that Single Strike Lugia is just an insane deck. It also feels like a very underappreciated deck right now. It's one of those decks that nobody really cares about at the moment. I feel like the big decks you're going to care about are like the Arc decks, the Lost Tina, and the Guardy decks, and maybe Lost Box. But Lugia nobody really thinks of right now, and I think that that's a big deal heading into Worlds. I think Lugia has a very good chance of doing well at Worlds. I think Lugia has a good matchup into Lost Tina. If Lost Tina's only playing Path and not playing Temple of Sinnoh, which seems to be the trajectory where the deck is going right now in the format, I think Lugia has a very good chance of just running hot and doing really well at Worlds, because I think it's still just a very good deck right now. I think it's a very solid deck. We've seen some, technology be added. Again, we've seen Lugia start to play Snorlax with Single Strike. We've seen Lugia play 4 Professor Burnett's all of a sudden. So Lugia, I think, is still a very good deck right now, and I think has a great matchup into most decks. It is a deck, though, that needs to have a good run to do well. Like, it has to run hot, play well, because it is very much at the end of the day, you either set up or you don't set up with the deck. That's basically Lugia in a nutshell. But I think Lugia is a very solid deck right now in the format. I think it is a very good deck that I think a lot of people are really sleeping on or just underappreciating, not really paying much attention to, which I think is a big deal for a deck like Lugia, because I think it's still very much a tier 1 deck right now. Next up is Skyseal Lost Box. We'll put that in tier 3. The idea of playing Skyseal Stone and Lost Box is something that I don't think is bad right now, and I think could be something to consider with the popularity of Lost Tina and Arceus decks. I mean, playing Skyseal isn't bad, right? You use Skyseal Stone, take a 3-prize KO, and an Arceus or a Giratina can really swing the prize trade in your favor and can be really deadly. I don't know. It's one of those like kind of underrated things right now in the meta that could be good if somebody were to play the Skyseal Lost Box deck. I don't know. We can say it's tier 3. Like, somebody could still do well. Like, you could play Skyseal in your Turbo Lost Box deck and probably do well with it. That's basically what I'm trying to say. That's why I can't put in any more, that's why I can't put in Roga or Bad, right? Because it's still a deck that people can play and do well with. Next up is Lost Gudra. This deck is starting to make a little bit of a comeback in the format. I'm not sure if that's warranted, though. I'll put it in tier 3 for now. In under circumstance, I would put this in the bad deck category. I don't think it was a good deck for NEIC, and I'm still not sold on the decks right now. Like, I don't think that Lost Gudra is great. I'm not even sure if it even beats Lost Tina, and maybe that's why it's seen players because it beats Lost Tina. I'm not too sure on that. I don't know. Gudra's definitely an interesting deck. But yeah, Lost Goo's okay. I think it's better than Arc Goo. If I was to play a Gudra deck for Worlds, I would probably play Lost Goo over Arc Goo, because I think Lost Goo has better, better times into Lost Tina, because at least you can play Moisture Star and you can play maybe like a Sableye in your deck. I think if I were to play Lost Gudra, yeah, I would probably consider playing a couple Ionos in the deck, Roxanne. I would definitely play maybe a Sableye in the deck, because I think that the deck probably needs Sableye to beat Lost Tina, but I don't hate Lost Goo right now. I don't think Lost Goo is a terrible deck at all in the format. I think it's honestly reasonably solid in the meta. Maybe not higher than tier 3, though, but I definitely don't hate it. It's not as bad as it was for NEIC. That's basically what I'm saying. It's not as bad as it was heading into NEIC. Next up is Kyogre Lost Box. Now, this deck, from what I've seen on Twitter, people have been winning challenges and cups with it, but we haven't really seen the deck make that many waves right now, but it's definitely a deck that I think has potential for Worlds. So I would maybe put Kyogre at tier 2 right now, just for Worlds, because I think maybe post-Worlds, Kyogre is going to do well, or it's going to flop. The big deciding factor as to whether that Kyogre is going to do well is ultimately going to be down to whether or not Iono is going to body your Kyogre or not, right? That's the problem with Kyogre right now, is Iono is too popular for Kyogre to reasonably as good. And that's why Kyogre is not as popular as it was in the last format. It's because, again, Iono is really popular right now, and Kyogre gets bodied by Iono, right? But Kyogre is still solid, and people are winning cups and challenges with it from what I've seen, and reasonably we can maybe put in tier 2 for now, like a solid tier 2 deck that maybe could go higher post-Worlds. Then we got Lost Tina. I'm going to have to put an S tier. Everyone is saying it's the best deck. Its results have been nutty right now. It's winning so many cups and challenges. It's winning a ton of online tourneys. It's destroying the online tourney scene in general. It's dominating the online tourney scene. I mean, again, in the last video, half of the top 8 was Lost Tina. The deck is just insane right now. Is it the best deck? Is Gardevoir or Lost Tina the best deck right now? Those are, in my opinion, the two definitive best decks right now. It's Lost Tina and Gardevoir. And maybe, well, actually, there might be one other deck. But for now, these are the two decks I can definitely say are S tier. Lost Tina is either all hype or all not hype. But the deck does seem very good. I think it has good matchups across the board. It farms Arceus pile decks, other than maybe Arctina is the only one that might be iffy, but that's kind of the selling point with Lost Tina, is it has a really good matchup against Arceus. That's why people are kind of gravitated towards it, is it destroys Arc decks, it beats Gardevoir, it still has the Lost On engine, don't forget, which is just insane. I think Lost Tina is a very good deck, and I hate to say it, but it might be the play for Worlds. Now, can it win the World Championships will be a bigger question, and can it even get top 8? At the World Championships? I think it's going to be very popular for Worlds. Because of its hype right now in the tourney scenes, I think this has a very good chance of being very popular at Worlds. Whether or not that popularity will translate to good performances, we'll have to see. But I think without a doubt, Lost Tina is S tier right now. A lot of people are saying that the deck is BDIF. I think most people will agree that it is the best deck in the format. Maybe above Gardevoir or behind Gardevoir, but without a doubt, Lost Tina seems to be just very strong right now in the format. Next up is Sableye Cramsard. I think it's another solid tier 2 Lost Zone deck. Much like Gardevoir, it's one of those like niche fringe ways to play Lost Box right now that people are still playing. I mean, I like the idea of Sableye Cramsard. I think it's pretty decent. I think Charizard is pretty solid right now in the format, especially against Giratina. That's the one thing I like about Sableye Cramsard, is I actually think it has a pretty good matchup against Tina. Some of the ways people are playing their Charizard decks here with Lost Box is using Milotic in the deck. So Milotic prevents you from being Ionoed or judged. So you put the Milotic down, they have to get around, they have to boss your Milotic to knock it out. And if they're not doing that, then you're just never getting Ionoed or judged. You're able to build up a big hand and kind of a checkmate scenario with the Charizard. So I really like Sableye Cramsard. Also, Lost City's sort of on the decline right now. Again, with these Arc Dura decks starting to fall off a little bit, and Lost City not being as popular as it was before, I think it does warrant some pretty good room for Sableye Cramsard right now. So I definitely think that Sableye Cramsard is a decent tier 2 deck. I think it's a solid way to play Lost Box that's kind of under the radar. It's basically, in my opinion, just like Kyogre right now. Right? People, I think, are going to play it. I definitely think Sableye Cramsard is going to see play at Worlds. Not going to be the most popular way to play Lost Box at Worlds, but will be played by some good players. I guarantee you that's going to happen. Then we got to talk about Fusion Mew. I think Fusion Mew is honestly reasonably a tier 1 deck right now. Yeah, Spiritomb is popular, but we've seen time and time again that a good Fusion Mew pilot can still get around the Spiritomb. The Fusion Strike Energy and the Ice Cube are very good. I think Fusion Mew is a great deck. I also think that it doesn't have a bad matchup against Giratina. I think its Giratina matchup is also, like, okay. Not terrible by any means. Not great, but not terrible either, right? That's kind of the way I look at it. But yeah, I think Fusion Mew is a pretty good potential tier 1 deck right now. It seems like it's a good tier 1 deck. I don't know. Maybe I'm over hyping Mew. Maybe Fusion Mew actually deserves to be in tier 1.5. Even with Spiritomb, though, I think a good Mew pilot can always do well at Worlds. I definitely think, and you got to remember, the World Championships is going to be the best players in the world competing against each other. And that means we're going to see some of the best players in the world piloting Fusion Mew, meaning that they decided to play Fusion Mew to Worlds, which is a big deal. That alone can give the deck room, and it's doing good in online tourneys. It's doing good in League Cups and Challenges, from what I've seen. It's definitely still a good deck right now. Maybe tier 1.5. I might be overhyping where the deck is. Maybe it's tier 1.5, not tier 1. But I certainly think that Fusion Mew is a pretty good deck right now. And I definitely think we're going to see a Fusion Mew in top 8 at Worlds. That's my prediction. We'll save that for my predictions video, obviously. But I think Fusion Mew is great for Worlds. Tier 1. Next up are Miraidon decks. Miraidon Regieleki, maybe tier 3. I think Flaffy Miraidon's better. I think Flaffy Miraidon's a decent tier 2 deck right now. It's not the worst deck ever in the world. Not the best, not the worst. I think Miraidon Regieleki is the worst way to play Miraidon, but I think that Miraidon Flaffy is the better way to play Miraidon right now. Yeah, I think Miraidon's okay. Probably an okay tier 2 deck. Maybe the worst of the tier 2 decks, but definitely a tier 2 deck at the end of the day. I think Miraidon's perfectly fine. A lot of people like to meme on it, but don't underestimate the power of Miraidon, man. I really don't think it's a bad deck at all. I don't know about the Lost Tina matchup per se, but I don't think it's a bad matchup because you are such an aggressive deck. You can easily overpower Tina and then kind of get to the point where it doesn't matter what they do, you can still win the game. I guess it really comes down to whether or not you're Iono'd into a bad hand or not. Control is a weird deck. I gotta throw Control in the rogue category, not because I think the deck is bad. I think it's more of a rogue deck than an actual bad deck. That's why it's rogue/bad. I think that Control's in a very interesting spot heading into Worlds. I don't think it's a bad deck because I'm sure Sanders going to play a Control deck. I'm sure Control will see play at Worlds. Somebody will play a Control deck. Whether or not Control can beat, Tina, Arcdex, Xianpao, Gardevoir, all that stuff, we'll have to see. Definitely a rogue deck. Next up is Regis. So Regis did well in a recent big tournament, and then it's starting to apparently do well in League Cups and Challenges from what I've seen. I don't know, man. I hate this, man, but I gotta put Reggie in the rogue deck for now. I don't know if the deck is any higher than a rogue deck. My issue with Reggie's is it even beating, Lost Zone decks consistently? Maybe it can beat Lost Tina. I don't think it has a bad Lost Tina matchup, but is it beating, Turbo Lost Box consistently? And if Kyogre's gonna make a comeback, what's to say Reggie's is gonna, not be able to beat that? I also don't know if Reggie's is even able to beat the Flying Pikachu Arc decks. I don't know if it's going to even be able to beat Rapid Strike. It definitely seems like a weird deck to do well. I don't know. Like, it's okay. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's a bad deck. I think it's classified as a rogue deck before a bad deck. But, I don't know. I love Regis. I want Regis to be good again. But I'll have to see it to believe it is my take on it. Tinglu, probably tier 3. Much like Miraidon. I feel like it's kind of a worse Miraidon. Tinglu doesn't seem to have a good Guardy matchup. Also, I think Tinglu just loses to Lost Tina. Lost Tina has Abyss Seeking, which is really, really bad for the deck, right? Tinglu having, a good matchup against normal Lost Box is good, and maybe it beats Arc decks that don't play Flying Pikachu. But other than that, I don't know if Tinglu is that great of a deck. Probably a tier 3 deck at best. I don't know if I can really rank Tinglu any higher, unfortunately. Next up is Turbo Lost Box. This might be the only other S-tier deck right now. Turbo Lost Box is obviously still a fantastic deck, doing really well in online tourneys, doing really well in League Cups and Challenges from what I've seen. I think without a doubt, Turbo Lost Box is definitely one of the other 3 best decks in the format right now. I think Turbo Lost Box is still a solid deck. It also has a good Giratina matchup, or at least its Giratina matchup seems to be good, because you are faster than Giratina with Sableye, and that's going to be the big selling point as to why you want to play Turbo Lost Box. So I think Turbo Lost Box is pretty good right now, and without a doubt is still one of the best decks to beat right now. It's maybe better than Giratina, but definitely seems to be a decent deck to beat Giratina. That's why I think Turbo Lost Box is still a best deck, without a doubt. And then finally we have United Wings. I mean, I don't know if I can put Wings any higher than the Rogue deck at this point. The problem is, now that Lost Tina is popular, now you have to worry about another version of Lost Zone. Like, if it was just Turbo Lost Box that was popular, then United Wings would be maybe tier 3. But because now we have another deck using Sableye that's popular, I don't know if we can call United Wings a good deck anymore, because you just get farmed by Sableye too easily. And Rapid Strike's still out there. I don't know if I can call United Wings that good of a deck anymore. It definitely is a cool deck, don't get me wrong. I really like the deck, but calling it, a good deck right now, I think would just be, not ideal. Yeah, it can beat Gardevoir and Mew probably, and maybe it can beat some of the Arc decks that don't play Lost City, but other than that, I can't really call United Wings a great deck, because again, with the popularity of Sableye right now, with both Turbo Lost Box and Lost Tina, I don't think United Wings is ever going to be a good deck right now to play. So for now, we got to put it in the bad deck category. But that's it for the World Championship tier list. What do you think of the tier list here heading into the World Championships? Were my takes correct? The only take that I'm iffy on is whether or not Rapid Strike deserves to be in tier 2 and whether or not Fusion Mew deserves to be tier 1 or tier 1.5. Though that's kind of my take right now as to where the meta is. But I think that the World Championship is looking pretty good. I think definitively the 3 best decks right now is Guardy, Lost Tina, and Turbo Lost Box. And anything below it is not the BDIF. So that'll be it for me. If y'all enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below once again to the second channel and all that good stuff. I'll leave a link to this tier list down below if you want to go try it yourself. And I'll see y'all later with some more World Championship content later this week. Peace out.